YouTube! What's going on, guys? Doomwake here, and welcome back to Watching the Meta, the weekly series where you get to watch me watching the meta, watching me watching... I don't know. It's got to stop somewhere, right? The train ends somewhere, as it were. But anyways, this is the weekly series where we take a look at the metagames of Modern, Pioneer, and Standard, take a look and see changes that were made from the previous week in terms of the top 32 of events. That could be Magic Online, challenges, qualifiers, MOX events, and also paper events, if those are applicable, which we do have a couple of those to take a look at in today's episode. But before we continue, as always, if you enjoy this type of content, please leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what was your favorite deck from this episode? And also, more importantly, what are your thoughts on Standard right now? Also, subscribe to the channel. And with all of that out of the way, we are going to start, as we always do, with the Modern format. And I'm going to be honest with you, in terms of the metagame and the number of different decks that are being played and their respective representation, Modern is probably the best format right now, and I don't even think it's particularly close. So Boros Energy clocking in at 19.5%, down a little bit from last week. You'll notice that, I mean, honestly, there's not a ton that's changed, right? The metagame has sort of solidified into this Boros, Prowess, Eldrazi sort of rock, paper, scissors, and then everybody else below that is sort of vying and jockeying for position, right? Ruby Storm, Dimir Murktide. Like, there's some small changes here and there, but nothing too crazy. Orzhov Blink going from 2.7 to 5.1%. You see Affinity, little down just a little bit, not too much. The one thing that I do want to highlight, Neobrand, going from 1.8% last week to 5.5%. Now, we did take a look at one of those deck lists last week, so if you want to go check out that, be sure to check out last week's episode. I will say, for the most part, the lists are the same, sort of. They're the more fair style Neoform decks with no Nourishing Shoals, no combo, really just leaning in on Birthing Ritual, Eldritch Evolution, and Neoform to just go find a big creature and ride that to victory. And like I said, past that, nothing else too crazy. Like I said, Boros, Izzet, Eldrazi, those seem to be the RPS of the format. But we do have some interesting decks to take a look at beyond that. And you'll notice that in the winners, in terms of the decks that won, there was an Azorius Stoneblade deck that won a challenge. And I would be remiss if we did not take a look at that deck list. So shout out to Matty Guy 13 in first place here. And this is Stoneblade. So for those of you who don't know what that means, it is a deck that is centered around the card Stoneforge Mystic, which was unbanned in Modern, I can't remember how long ago. Was it 6 years, I think, at this point? Somewhere in that range. It's been a long time. And it is a powerful card that lets you search for an equipment and then lets you put an equipment from your hand onto the battlefield for 2 mana. The card that you're going to be getting, I would assume most often, to heavily pressure your opponent is Cauldron Complete, which is 7 mana, living weapon, so it comes in with its own creature tokens, and it's a 5/5 first strike trample, indestructible haste. That's a lot of keywords. So, you know, whenever this deck has the ability to just put a ton of pressure on people, back that up with counter spells. I guess there's not a ton of counters in this particular version. Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, and a Sink into Stupor, and some reprieves. What's interesting to me is there are no copies of Force of Negation. That is a card that pairs particularly well with Stoneforge Mystic, because you can activate the Stoneforge on your turn, hit them for 5, and then hold up Force even if you have to tap out on their turn. But we do have some additional creatures here. These Thraben Inspectors are kind of intriguing me a little bit here. I'm looking at this deck list, and unless I'm missing something, there's not a ton. I mean, you need some for Ephemerate, I guess. Maybe just to grease the wheels a little bit on that. You have Harbinger of the Seas for the big mana decks. You have the Solitude Ephemerate package for the decks that are trying to go wide, smaller creatures, the Stoneforges. And then another cool thing is Tishana's Tidebinder with Ephemerate. That is a really cool addition, because Tishana's Tidebinder in the Modern format can counter fetch lands. And if you ever have Tishana's in play with Ephemerate in hand, and they go to fetch land, I mean, you're countering the fetch land for 1 mana. That basically is a stifle if you think about it. So all in all, pretty cool and interesting list here from Matty Guy 13 and Stoneblade back in the menu. Next up here, we have Dragon Fodder in 25th place. And I do recognize that name. Dragon Fodder is a longtime player of the Lightning Skelemental archetype. So Lightning Skelemental is sort of a riff on Ball Lightning, where for 3 mana, you get a 6/1 trample haste. Whenever it hits them, that player discards 2 cards, and then end step, you have to sacrifice it. But you have some ways to utilize the Lightning Skelemental before it gets sacrificed. You can sacrifice it to Bone Shards. You can sacrifice it to Flare of Malice. You can sacrifice it to Corrupted Conviction or Village Rites. So you have a lot of ways to utilize the body. And then, even if it goes to the graveyard, you have ways to bring it back. So you have 4 copies of Unearth and 2 Thunderkin Awakeners. This is kind of a weird one, but it's essentially a 1/2 haste that whenever it attacks, you bring back the Lightning Skelemental tapped and attacking. So a lot of ways to utilize the body and reanimate it. You have Stitcher Supplier to help start the self-mill chain to mill over those Skelementals, or perhaps even mill over a Bloodghast. So you have all of this stuff, and all of those cards are black and red, and you'll notice there's some blue lands in the mana base. That's because we are also taking advantage of a Borinoculus, which is a cool card that is very powerful when you can reanimate it for a singular mana. Hey, that's what Unearth does. You even have Faithless Looting to set that up as well. Looting can discard Oculus or even Skelemental to be able to reanimate that for cheaper. A lot of cool stuff going on here from Dragon Fodder's list. And I mean, I've never been a huge fan of Skelemental, but the blue does seem to add a new dimension to this deck. Do you really think we wouldn't go an entire episode without mentioning the best card printed since Sliced Bread? Cori-steel Cutter. So this is from user Manohito in 30th place. We have a slightly, I mean, what do we call this deck? It's like Boros Energy, but also Affinity, Borfinity, Aphoros, something like that. I guess there's not really a ton of affinity elements since there's no copies of Urza Saga. But what this deck is trying to take advantage of is the synergy between Cori-steel Cutter and the Zeros, Mishra's Bauble, and Mox Opal. The only other artifact that I can see in the deck is these copies of Unstable Amulet, which is sort of a way to bridge the gap, right? It's an artifact that pays you off for having extra energy, because you can use energy to exile a card from the top of your library and then play that. So you have some ways to take advantage of that. You have Galvanic Discharge to generate more energy alongside the traditional package of Gaddis Souls and Ocelot Pride. We have 1 copy of Jolted Awake, which is kind of cool because Jolted Awake can actually get back artifacts or creatures. So if your Cori-steel Cutter gets removed or discarded, you can just get it back for 1 mana. Speaking of getting it for 1 mana, you can also tutor it with Steel Shaper's Gift. Interesting that there's not any, like, sort of spicy one-of targets to tutor for. I guess, to be fair, when you have the ability to get a Cori-steel Cutter for 1 mana, you're probably not going to want to be getting anything else other than Cutter, because that card is so powerful. But then you just got the usual Ragavans, Galvanic Blast, which is enabled by all of the artifacts. So, interesting looking deck list. I wonder if something like this maybe wants copies of Urza Saga to help kind of mix with the Cori Bauble Opal plan a little bit more. But all in all, interesting take on the Boros Energy deck. If the last deck was more energy, this one is certainly more affinity. Till Ford L, 27th place here. So this is sort of somewhat similar to the affinity list that I had tried. I basically took Kappa Cannoneer Thought Monitor, paired that with Cori-steel Cutter, Ornithopter Memnite, Bauble Opal, and kind of leaned more on the affinity stuff, right? Now, this isn't necessarily playing that many affinity cards. Really, the only one here is Thoughtcast, so no Kappa Cannoneers, no Thought Monitors, none of that stuff. But instead, we're pairing that with kind of the Legend package, so Emery and Tamiyo. If you've seen blue decks with artifacts over the past 6 months, you've seen these cards in those decks. But a new addition here in the form of Basim. which is kind of cool because Basim wants you to play the 0 mana artifacts, Bauble, Amber, and Opal, and guess what else wants you to play the 0 mana artifacts? Cori-steel Cutter. So you sort of have two different 2 mana engines that both pay you off for having an abundance of 0 mana artifacts. You pair that with Galvanic Blast and Metallic Rebuke for interaction, a couple of Urza Sagas for additional threats, Thoughtcaster nice at flipping Tameo, Emery very powerful with Bauble, and you're cooking with a little stew here. So I don't know if this is better than the more traditional affinity decks, but it is certainly capable of drawing a lot more cards if you're into that kind of thing. Alrighty, and with Modern out of the way, we are going to take a look at the Pioneer format. And now, if you look at Pioneer's metagame last week, 25% Mice, 18% Phoenix, but almost half of the room, or half of the online room, was playing those two decks. That number has gone down relatively significantly. So Mono Red has gone from 25 to 13.5. That's almost a 50% decrease. Phoenix has gone from 18.8 to 14.1, down a little bit. Mono Black up a little bit from 12.5 to 14.1. And then Celestia Angels going up a little bit from 6.9 to 8.9. So we sort of have these four decks accompanying or taking up roughly about 50% of the metagame. After that, Mono White tokens, slight downtick. It's actually kind of funny that there was a downtick in Mono White because there was a Pioneer Qualifier event. And the finals of that event was a Mono White tokens 75 card mirror. I believe it was Darkest Mage and McWinsauce, and they worked together on the list. And they kind of crushed everybody, so that was kind of cool to see. Azorius Control, bit of an uptick here from 3.8 to 7.3. It's interesting because I think there are ways to build your Azorius Control deck to have a reasonable Phoenix and Mono Red matchup, where you can play High Noon, which I think is good against both of those decks. A little bit less good against Mono Red, but still decent enough against Phoenix. And I get the big issue with Azorius is the Mono Black matchup, where you have discard spells and Unholy Annex and a lot of these like Liliana the Veil card advantage engines. That matchup can be kind of difficult. Lotus Field combo up to 4.7%, up a little bit from last week, which appears to be about 1.3. So noticeable uptick there. And then everything else roughly about the same. Is it Prowess from 2.5 to 4.2? But yeah, I mean, relatively healthy looking. The highest percentage deck is a tie for 14.1%, and a lot of different decks that you can play right now. And we are going to take a look at some of the more interesting ones right now. The first one I want to showcase you guys is from Mystery Man 21 in 7th place. No longer a mystery. And what we have here is, I don't know if anybody remembers this. This was, I want to say, right around when Bloomborough came out with the release of Thundertrap Trainer. And people had tried something like this before, and to be quite honest with you, the deck really hasn't changed that much. I mostly just wanted to highlight it because there was a couple of different lists. They all looked about the same, and this one got 7th place. So the goal of this deck, you might see a Abhorrent Oculus and you think to yourself, how are we casting that? There's no self-mill, there's no reanimation. Well, the concept is you play Augur of Bolas, which is a 2-mana 1/3 that finds an instant or sorcery, Philagi Archaeologist, 2-mana 0/3, which finds, you guessed it, an instant or sorcery. And, oh wait, there's more, Thundertrap Trainer, 2-mana 1/2 that finds an instant or sorcery. So you have 12 2-mana creatures that all find sorceries. The sorcery that we are going to find is Neoform. Neoform is a spell that lets you sacrifice a creature and search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrificed creature's mana value. Quick math, let me know. 1 plus 2 equals, you guessed it, that's 3. That's the answer. So you can basically have all of these different 2-drops that find you the Neoform that then sacrifice the 2-drop to go get you Oculus. So this entire deck is just built around getting Oculus into play and then lots of ways to protect it. So Essence Flux, which is a blue card for 1 mana that you can basically flicker a creature. So if they go to kill it, you can flicker it. Fading Hope. Yeah, you don't really want to bounce it because you don't have a ton of ways to cast it again. but you can with Philology and stuff. And then the more important ones, Stubborn Denial, which is turned on when you have an Oculus, and then Tyvar Stand, which is a way to give your Aboran Oculus hexproof and indestructible. So pretty simple, straightforward deck list. And I mean, like I said, 7th place, maybe Neoform Oculus back on the menu. Next up from Strangled Angles, 25th place. Shout out to Strangled Angles. I actually got to meet them this past weekend in Hartford because I was there. We're going to talk about that tournament in a second, don't worry. But they have this lovely looking Orzhov deck in 25th place. And I wanted to highlight this one because it's demons, but there's some interesting card choices here. So first and foremost, the deck is based around Unholy Annex, and I guess there's actually no demons besides the 2 Blades and the 4 Mutavaults. But the 2 cards that I wanted to highlight here are Voice of Victory, which is a 1/3 that says your opponent can't cast spells during your turn. Well, remember, if you go back a couple of frames, we took a look at the metagame, and Azorius Control was making a bit of a comeback. It's pretty hard for your Azorius Control opponent to play Magic when they can't cast spells on your turn. So it's good there. It's a 1/3, which means the Phoenix deck needs to get Spell Mastery before they can Fiery Impulse it, which they can do, but, there's something there. And it attacks your opponent for 3. So it's effectively a 2-mana 3-power creature that has this ability to have your opponent not be able to interact on your turn. That's pretty good. Another card that I want to highlight here is Archon of Emeria, where 2 of the 3 or 4 best decks in the format are Mono Red and Izzet Phoenix. Those decks like to cast a lot of spells in the same turn. Archon of Emeria prevents that from happening. Also, non-basic lanes your opponent controls enter the battlefield tapped. I don't know how often that line of text matters, but I mean, even 2-color decks play a lot of dual lands. You're looking at a 2-color deck that's playing 25 lands, and there's only 4 basics. So the mana bases are a little bit more non-basic heavy than they are in standard. So cool looking list, Black-White Demons, and again, shout out to Strangled Angles. Alrighty, next up we have Oisicrat, 30th place. I believe they actually put up a performance in the Pioneer Qualifier. I think they might have actually got top 16 there. But it was the same exact 75, I believe. Now, the reason I wanted to highlight this deck, it's similar to creativity decks that you may have seen in the past, where they're built around Indomitable Creativity, which is a card that lets you blow up a bunch of tokens to go find creatures. Most of the time, the creativity decks are playing 1 Atraxa and 1 Valgavoth. And the main reason I wanted to highlight this is Herald of Eternal Dawn is our new creativity target. So it's a 6/6 flash flyer that says you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game, which is an interesting card. Now, if you think about it, the best decks in the format being Mono Red and Izzet Phoenix. Mono Red has a bunch of 1-mana 2-damage spells. Izzet Phoenix has Lightning Axe, which deals 5, and Fiery Impulse, which deals 3. Now, that being said, Phoenix can still kill it, right? They can just use two of their red spells to kill it because it's only a 6/6. But you do have some ways to protect it as well, right? You have a couple of counter spells in the form of No More Lies. So interesting to see Herald of Eternal Dawn be the creativity target of choice in a metagame maybe more dominated by stuff like Mono Red and Phoenix, and specifically Mono Red having access to a ton of burn and 4 main deck Sunspine links. So it kind of makes sense, but the rest of the deck is sort of what you would expect. I guess Skrelv's Hive is a bit of a new addition. This is something I haven't seen in these creativity decks before, but it's a 2-mana enchantment, makes a token every turn, pairs pretty well with creativity. So shout out to Oisicrat, sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, for the Herald of Eternal Dawn tech. Speaking of creativity decks that play odd creatures that you've never seen before, how about Worldspine Worm and Xenagos God of Revels? So shout out to ATOG MTG 31st place. For people who maybe haven't been following Pioneer as long as I have, since basically the Stone Age, you may not know that people have played Worldspine and Xenagos in the past. I'll explain. It's fairly straightforward. Worldspine Worm, 15/15 trample. Xenagos is a card that says, beginning of combat, another creature you control gains haste and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. So 30 power, trample haste. So it is a way for your indomitable creativity to be 5 mana, you win the game on the spot. There was a period of time where you couldn't really do this because there were more bounce spells and wandering emperors and ways to exile. So this plan was not very good in certain metagames where those were more prevalent. But now that the format is mostly leaned on mono black, Phoenix, and mono red, maybe a good time to bring back the one-shot kill. The big downside is you do have the creativity for 2, because if you flip a coin, and some of the time you're going to hit Worldspine Worm, and that's great. But then the other half of the time you're going to hit an enchantment that doesn't have any text. So would highly recommend not gambling and hitting creativity for 1. Try to wait till you get 2. But yeah, just wanted to highlight this one as 2 different ways to build the creativity deck. Who knows which one's better? Now, with Pioneer out of the way, let us take a look at Standard. So yeah, about that Cori-steel cutter card, huh? I'm not going to spend too much time on the breakdown of what's wrong with the format, how to be fixed, all that kind of stuff, because I want to do a separate video specifically highlighting that. So be on the lookout for that in the next couple of days. I'm recording this on Tuesday, so either tomorrow or Thursday, try to get it up Friday or Saturday, but it'll be up this week for sure. Just a separate video on prowess. But, I mean, TLDR, 38% of the format. So there was 4 events because 2 of the challenges didn't fire. Sign of a healthy format, right? And of the 4 events, the 3 of them were won by mono red. Now, you might say to yourself, okay, well, is it prowess? 38% of the metagame. It's not winning any events. The 3 mono red decks that won all had Magebane Lizard main deck. That is how you win in this format. And it is the equivalent of people in Modern putting Stony Silence into their Boros Energy main decks. That's how crazy this is. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I'm going to save all of my ranting for that specific video. Just know that this is not healthy. I don't know how else to say it. Yeah. Dimir midrange 8.6, mono red 7%, Jessica Ekless 5.5. I mean, Omniscience went from 4.7 to 7%. That's cool. Orzhov Pixie went down a little bit. Mono red's about the same. Really, there's nothing that changed other than the fact that 5% more people play prowess. Anyways, I can't look at this graph or this pie chart without laughing hysterically. Anyways, we're not going to talk about prowess. We are going to talk about some of the more interesting decks to come out of the regional championship in Hartford, because that did take place this past weekend. So the first one I wanted to highlight, the list that won by Percy Fang. So Percy was the winner of Regional Championship Hartford. Congratulations to them. They won with mono red, main deck Magebane Lizard. And these are the lengths that people have to go to in order to have a chance in this format. Again, I said I wasn't going to try to harp too much and spend too much time on it, but that's just the world that we live in. But yeah, congratulations to Percy. 2 Swift Spear, 1 Scorching Shot, 4 Witchstalker Frenzy. Something I hadn't seen a lot of red players do, but kind of makes a lot of sense because of how good Frenzy is at targeting your own nemesis. It's just sometimes 1 mana lava axe your opponent, and you can get some surprise kills out of nowhere with that. A couple of Soul Stones, 4 Village, 16 Mountain. The only thing that surprised me about this list is that they didn't play the 4th Magebane in the main deck. Now, huge congratulations to 10th place. Forgive me, this was Jesse Paland. That's who it was. Jesse Paland in 10th place at the regional championship, and they almost made top 8 with Insidious Roots. The idea is pretty simple. You have Insidious Roots, which is a card that pays you off for cards leaving your graveyard. You have a bunch of different ways to do that. You have Dredger's Insight to mill and find more stuff. Same with Cash Grab. Molt Tender is a sick addition to this deck because it is a mana rock, but every time you're making mana off of the Moltender, you're also triggering your Insidious roots. You got some Llanowar Elves for mana acceleration, Snarling Gorehound to help mill over more cards. Maverick is kind of sick because you can either mill this off of Gorehound, Cash Grab, or Treasure's Insight, and then once you have it in the graveyard, you can just pay a green to exile it by itself to trigger roots again. Now, the one thing that Jesse decided to do was play the combo. The combo being Voldaren Thrillseeker and Osteomancer Adept. Now, I don't necessarily know, because remember, when we looked at roots lists either last week or the week before, there was one that did well. I think it was Australia, New Zealand, and they didn't have the Osteomancers. They just had more mid-rangey stuff, like they had the Stormbrood's main deck. I think they had Glissas and Karsi Revenants, and Jesse decided to just go full on, here's the combo. And I think that does make sense, even though Prowess has a number of ways to break up the combo. If you put Adept under Cauldron, you can sort of force through the combo that way, even through a bunch of kill spells. And the nature of Prowess is it just doesn't give you a lot of time to set up. So I think that does make a lot of sense, just having the ability to sort of win out of nowhere in a game that feels lost otherwise. The Curious Forger is kind of cool because that is a way to just sort of return permanence, so you can get back roots that are milled over and things like that. The one Cauldron. This deck is built very, very well. I think that a lot of these numbers make sense. You got some main deck Haywire Mites, good against those Cori-steel cutters. I don't really know if I understand the sideboard land. So I think the idea is because we have multiple 4s, like the Skyfisher, the Swarm Reaver, and the Stormbrew, just want to board in an extra land. And this one is probably the best one because this one actually is good if the game goes long. So when you're flooding out, you don't mind drawing this if it's your extra land. So makes sense there. Again, all in all, just a very, very well-built deck, and congratulations to Jesse. And the last top 32 deck list, remember, from the regional championship, all players who made top 32 qualify for the Pro Tour. This one was 18th place from Ryan Donkin, and Ryan brought crabs to the event. Now, I don't recall exactly how many crabs players there were. To be honest with you, like, if you showed me a crab deck list from, 7-8 months ago, it probably wouldn't be that much different than this. The only really relatively new cards we have are Stock Up, right? That's it. I think everything else was Wilds and before, which is kind of crazy, right? Where this deck didn't really gain anything new. I guess the Verge is big, right? Because before, when you only had 8 dual lands, he's actually not even playing Yavimaya Coast. So I guess, yeah. But getting to swap Yavimaya Coast for Verge definitely helps the red matchups because you're not taking as much damage. But you do kind of need the extra dual lands because you find yourself, like, all of these cards you're trying to cast early, and it just really messes with your double spell turns. The 4 towns with the 4 talents makes a lot of sense. Beanstalks with crabs and terrors. Like, the decks like this, they sort of, in a weird way, come pre-built, where you have some, like, how many Analyze, how many Dispersal, how many Stock Up, but really everything else is sort of like you need to play these cards. You have the Self-Mill with Cash Grab and Seed of Hope, put a bunch of spells in the graveyard, cast some 1 or 2 mana 5/5s, and draw a bunch of cards. And I think that this deck's best draws where you're going turn 3 Terror, or sometimes I think there's even ways where you can turn 3 double Terror. But when you're doing stuff like that, those are the draws that can beat Prowess. Like when you have multiple Terrors very, very fast. And yeah, this deck has the capability of doing that. That's going to do it for the RC deck lists. I got one more that I want to show you from the 10K, and that is Azorius Artifacts. Not a lot has changed in this deck list from when we last looked at it, which was Bologna. Bologna was the first time we saw this deck make a very, very deep run. Really, the only change that I've seen, I can't remember if the Bologna list was playing Market Gnome. I want to say no, they were playing Candy Trail. That's what it was. So we've swapped out the Candy Trails for Market Gnomes, which I like because this is also an early blocker for Prowess, but really everything else is sort of the same. Only a couple repurposing bays, no Enigma Jewel, some Smites main deck, 3 Saw Blades, 3 Braided Nets, 2 Cryptic Coats, the 4 Battlefronts. Yeah, but really just wanted to highlight this because I'm not going to highlight a Prowess deck. Alrighty, folks, that is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. Again, if you guys want my takes on the current standard format, look out for that video. Again, I'm going to try to get it out Friday is the goal, but depending on when I record, it may be Saturday. But if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get notified whenever I post new videos, and you'll be able to know exactly when I post that video. So again, thank you all for watching another episode of Watching the Meta, and I'll see you guys next week. And until next time, adios.